Now, on to our keynotes. It gives me great pleasure to welcome our first speaker. He's a tech champion, a writer, a politician, currently a Conservative candidate, I think, for North West Hampshire. We're delighted to have Kit Malthouse, Deputy Mayor of London, who's going to present his vision for the future of London and how the Mayor's Office is supporting the economic development of our great city. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kit Malthouse.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. First of all, apology to the organisers and Claire and Level 39 for rushing in at the last minute. I cycle. And I had to stop this morning to remonstrate with a, I guess he was about 15-year-old boy on one of our Boris bikes with headphones up the inside of a long line of traffic, trying to teach himself to cycle with no hands. So I had to stop him and explain that he was paddling in the shallow end of the gene pool, not what we would call a smart citizen. So it's a slightly grandiose title for what I wanted to talk about, because, of course, we're not really quite sure what the future of London is going to be. If you'd predicted, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago that London was going to be, the economic powerhouse of the country, of Europe, possibly the greatest city in the world, more tourists than ever, more foreign direct investment, population growing by 2,500 new Londoners every single week. We just reached our peak in population, actually, just last month. People would have smiled and laughed, and nobody could really predict and plan. And to a certain extent, that's why we're facing some of the problems we do. But what I thought I'd talk to you about this morning is what we are trying to do, not to predict and provide, but generally have faith that as the city grows, there are certain things we need to do to make sure that it remains a kind of fertile place for people to work and live. Just a bit of background. I got elected to the London Assembly back in 2008 alongside Boris. I represent all of Westminster, Kensington, Chelsea, Hammersmith and Fulham. 20 square miles of central London, 600,000 people, the most productive 20 square miles in Europe. Raising more tax revenue than Scotland and Wales combined. No hard feelings. But it's a fantastic part of town. But alongside me, Boris was elected, and he asked me in the first 4 years to be Deputy Mayor for Policing. During our polling that we'd done in the election campaign of 2008, the number one issue that had come out of that was crime. We were very concerned about crime in the city. Those of you who are Londoners or read the newspaper, cast your mind back, we had a mounting number of teenagers being killed, lots of stabbings and shootings on the street. In the July after we got elected, in 1 week in July, we had 6 young people killed in 1 week, 3 in 1 day. It was a real crisis for the city, and we were very focused on it. So I spent 4 years wrestling with the Metropolitan Police. We managed to get crime down by about 11%. It's now down overall 17% since 2008. Murder down by 40% since then. My final year, we had, I think, 101 murders. In 2005, we had 211. So we'd halved it. Teenage killings more than halved. Anyway, that, for us, was a fantastic result. But it came through, interestingly, in the polling we did in the 2012 election campaign. So crime had dropped from number one issue down to number 3, I guess a political achievement as well as a practical one, and been replaced at number 2 by, any guesses? Housing. And at number 1, remember this is 2008, by the economy, by jobs in the economy. So we decided we'd never really had a political response to the London economy. So we decided to create this position of Deputy Mayor for Business and Enterprise, which is my full title, and I was given the job. 4 years with the cops was more than enough. Asked to switch. So business and the economy, but I was faced with a dilemma, which is London's economy is about 15-20% bigger than that of Austria. We are, as a city, essentially a medium-sized European nation. And yet we don't have all the levers that a minister of the economy of a medium-sized European nation would have. In fact, I have a team of 25 or so people and a budget of about 200 million quid, specifically for economic interventions. We obviously spend about 14, 16 on the police, on transport, all the rest of it. But nevertheless, it's quite a small thing. And if the Minister of the Economy of Austria came and said, well, you know, I've got 200 million euros to spend on about 20 people, you would smile and think he or she wasn't going to get an awful lot done. And it felt a bit like that in the early days. And as we went through the games, which were on us pretty soon after the election, I came pretty rapidly to the conclusion that if we were going to make a marginal difference to the London economy, we needed to focus. Not only focus what we were doing as a department, if you like, but also focus the rest of the mayoral family, the Met, TfL, the Fire Brigade, all the other ancillary bits and pieces on this number one priority of economic development, jobs and growth, with the simple task, I guess, or twin task, to get as many Londoners as possible to be economically active as quickly as possible and to prepare the city for the economy of the future. And we decided to focus our efforts in 4 key areas, and I thought I'd just quickly take you through them. The first is obviously infrastructure. It's extremely important that the machine works. We're investing billions in transport. Those of you who came here on the Jubilee line will have seen that. But Crossrail is grinding its way. Well, actually, the boring machines have met now in the middle of town. That will open in 2017, running east-west, adding 10% to the entire capacity of our underground network. It will be a huge achievement. It's going to cost about 17 billion quid, huge long trains, air conditioning, about as smart as you can get. And we're now talking about Crossrail 2, investing, connecting southwest with northeast for the first time. Feasibility on that is underway, and we think that the skills we got from Crossrail 1 will translate into Crossrail 2. Obviously, the Northern Line extension now agreed. That will start grinding its way under Pimlico and all the rest of it to open up Battersea Power Station. We're talking about upgrading the line to Stansted and Cambridge now from 2 tracks to 4. There's a lot going into transport. New buses, new bikes. The blue tide is spreading west, not so far north because there are hills. They're experimenting with electric bikes, but we'll see. So all of that transport is great, but there's other stuff too. So connectivity, broadband is an issue for us. We have 80-odd% superfast broadband coverage in the suburbs, where the providers can flog us other stuff, like TV and things that will pay for it. But in the centre of town, not so much. 40-45% in our medieval street pattern. You can get it if you want it, but it's expensive to get. So we have a project on to try and connect more of the centre of town quickly into the internet. Our power grid is creaking. As you will have seen, the development in London sprouting, cranes everywhere. That's drawing masses and masses of power. Now, I went to around a building at the back of King's Cross at the moment that's drawing 15 megawatts on its own. And so we're getting a few problems. Greyouts, blackouts in the West End. We've had whole theatres go down in my constituency in the middle of the night. There's something wrong with our regulatory system. At the moment, our power providers aren't. It's odd, really. Funny, those of you from, I guess, mostly British audience. Our utilities operate in an odd vacuum. I didn't realise, it suddenly occurred to me the other day that these companies aren't incentivised to sell more of their product. It's weird. They're told you've got to sell less of your product, which produces an odd kind of incentive structure. Anyway, they're not investing enough. Water, similarly, we've got massive plans that all our water system is being renewed. There's a huge amount going into infrastructure, and we are concentrating on that very much. The second area for us is about skills. There are industries now in London, and you're sitting in an example of it, that did not exist 10 years ago. We have the biggest, fastest growing digital cluster in Europe between here and Shoreditch, Tech City, now 27% of all new jobs in London coming in tech and digital. We didn't have that 10 years ago. And so as the world changes, my kids are going to face, I've got a 16-year-old and two 3-year-olds, twins. The 16-year-old is going to face a different job market from the 3-year-olds. There will be jobs in 10, 12 years' time that don't exist now. And so having a fast-moving skills environment that is focused very much on those kind of knowledge economy jobs coming forward is critical for us. We're trying to reverse the equation where a young person comes out of school and decides to train on a random basis. They think, I quite fancy the look of that course, I'll do that, that's interesting, and I'll take a punt on there being a job at the end. That doesn't work in London anymore. We need industry to tell us in 3, 5, 10 years' time, these are the skills we will need. Please train your young people now. And so we're concentrating quite heavily on that and looking at hard-to-reach groups who aren't participating in some of the cornucopia of jobs and wealth and all the rest of it that are coming out of new industries, trying to get them in as well. The third area for us is small business, and I have to confess to a bit of self-interest here. I started my own business 20 years ago. I still chair it. I have somebody who manages it. She does a much better job than I ever did, thankfully. But during those 20 years, it's always driven me crazy that whenever politicians talk about business, they always wheel out a sort of FTSE 100 chief executive and pretend that that's business. Well, it's not really. It's administration and branding and a bit of HR and accounting, jiggery pokery, ask Tesco. And for me, business is being out there on a daily basis, risking your own capital, hewing your living from the rock with your bare hands. Over those 20 years, I've fought with everybody, the VAT man, the tax man, health and safety, the bank manager, my customers. They've all tried to put me out of business. And I've never really had any help from central government. So we decided to change that in London, not least because 90% of our businesses by number employ fewer than 10 people, and over 50% of our jobs are in small businesses. And so we're trying to do some things to help them. First of all, access to equity. We don't have a venture capital industry in this country anymore that's really worthy of the name. We used to. You used to be able to get 25, 50, 100 grand. Institutionally, there was a company called 3i. Anybody remember when they did those kind of investments? Right? But they moved up the value chain, became private equity barons, got incredibly rich, and forgot all about us minnows at the bottom. So at the moment, if you want to start a business in the UK, you really need to know somebody rich who's willing to go through the EIS, SEIS, rigmarole, and get started. So we're trying to do something about that. Hopefully, quite soon, we'll launch a city venture capital fund. Might be quite big. We think 100, maybe 200 million quid if we can get the Europeans to give us some more money. Looking specifically at that kind of seed and startup area. Where can we plant the acorns that will turn into the leviathans that we can sell to the Chinese and the Indians and the Americans, as we have been doing for the last 20 years. Second area is premises. We have too many businesses in London where the graph between what they need and what they can afford doesn't cross. Many of you are involved in workspace. The model of offices are changing. When I started my business, we had to have a front door that we could lock because we had filing cabinets with things that we didn't want other people to see, and checkbooks that we didn't want other people to get hold of. None of that exists anymore. Right? My business is basically my laptop. So it doesn't really matter where I sit. I don't need a secure space. And we've had I guess, a sort of blossoming of these shared spaces across the whole of London. So co-working spaces, shared space, hot desking, whatever you might call it, seems to be the model, particularly for new industries. And I think we now have more of those co-working spaces in London than they do in the whole of Spain. It's been a real burgeoning of it, and I think there's a new model there that we can look at and assist, not least with planning regulations and all those kind of things. So we're looking at that. And then the third area for small business is exports. We don't flog enough of our stuff, and we buy too much of other people's stuff. Small business in particular are very bad at exporting. We know that 60% of those small businesses that do export only started because somebody asked for their product. They didn't think they had anything to sell to the rest of the world. And so we're running trips across the world, working closely with UKTI, trying to get small business people to raise their eyes from the day-to-day and see that there are vast markets out there that, particularly with new technology, are easier to tap than they ever have been before, to try and get our stuff overseas. And then the fourth priority for us is about diversification. We love financial services. Here we are in Canary Wharf, a wonderful wealth generator for us. Financial and professional services in London generates about 60 billion a year for the UK economy. It pays for everything we do and Scotland and Wales combined. It's a fantastic earner for us. But having one string to your bow can be a bit dangerous, as we've learnt before, and can be a bit monotonous. And we do actually have a second kind of node of global expertise here. Unbeknownst to the rest of the world, we are, with our suburban neighbours, I guess, in Oxford and Cambridge, we are a scientific powerhouse. We reckon that the triangle of London, Oxford, Cambridge is the largest agglomeration of scientific research on the planet. We have 6 of the top 40 universities in the world. We have 5 of the top 7 life sciences universities in the world in and around London. This is an incredible asset, if you like, and we've never levered it for economic exploitation. So that's exactly what we're doing. So our 4th strand of concentration is science and technology, working very closely with our university base, King's, Imperial, UCL, Oxford, Cambridge. We are trying to position ourselves over the next 10 or 20 years so that science in London becomes as big an earner for us as financial services. We definitely have the academic base, and those universities, the 5 of them, are going through an incredible period of ambition. We totted it up the other day, and we reckon over the next 10 years, something like 8.5 billion quid will be spent on scientific research facilities alone in and around London. Imperial are spending 3.5 billion on a vast new campus at White City near Westfield, all of which will be dedicated to discovery and commercialization, turning ideas into businesses, money, and jobs. And so we want to do what we can to help that. And we're doing particular things. So in technology, for instance, we are putting our shoulders to the wheel on Tech City. We sort of help now with the promotion, the animating that cluster. Our friends here at Level 39 are a big part of that, developing our expertise in areas where we think we can win. So we are now the biggest node of fintech in the world in London. The world is flocking to understand what we can and can't do with financial technology. And on life sciences, we've decided to replicate the success of Tech City. So 6 months ago, we launched an organization called MedCity, which is doing the same for life sciences as we have done for technology. And it's like everything. Once you scratch the surface, the world comes running because we're London. And so we're working very hard on that, and we're having huge amounts of success. And we hope and believe that we'll see more in the rest of science, more of the kind of activity we've seen in technology, where the sort of startup scene of buzzing, all the rest of it, attracts the Leviathans. Google came, had a sniff around, and within 3 or 4 years they decided to put £1 billion into King's Cross, 750,000 square foot, a massive new building going in, thousands of jobs directly and indirectly. And we hope and believe life sciences will do the same. So those 4 things, infrastructure, skills, small business and science, those are the areas that we've been concentrating on over the last couple of years and will do over the next year or so. There is one other thing, though, that I should just finally mention that we think is a massive advantage for us and where we will be working hard to maintain it. And that, I guess, is illustrated by when I first came to London, 25 years ago, worked in financial services, we used to talk about Frankfurt as a rival. Everybody said, oh my God, Frankfurt's coming. We've really got to work hard. Frankfurt financial services, they're going to overtake us if we're not careful, those Germans. Amazing what they can do. But now, of course, Canary Wharf on its own is a bigger financial services sector than the whole of Frankfurt. Just this zone is bigger than the whole of Frankfurt. And the reason is because Frankfurt isn't fun. The phrase, darling, we're going to Frankfurt for the weekend, doesn't quite get the response that London and perhaps 1 or 2 other cities does. And the truth is, London is just a fantastic place. Once you've laid down your test tube, come away from your keyboard, you looked away from the screen, whether you're trading, whatever it might be, it's a fantastic place to play, to have fun. Enormous culture, 32,000 people a night going to the theatre, incredible institutions, new ones all the time. Olympic Games that showcased us to the world, or a happy, smiling place where the weather is occasionally good. Great schools, better than the rest of the country. This is one of the safest big cities in the world now. A transit system that can get you to and from the West End. Incredible shopping, amazing investment. It's just, we're going through a purple patch at the moment. And I think that will attract all of these people to come and do all their stuff and cross-fertilize and hopefully mean that purple patch continues into the future. When I first came to London, there was a saying in the city, which is the best quarter is always the quarter before the crash. Now, we are going through a fantastic set of quarters at the moment, and we're very careful to make sure that we're getting everything right to maintain it into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can we take a couple of questions? Yeah. Okay, well, thank you, Deputy Mayor. A purple patch for London, the perfect pitch for London. We've time for a couple of questions. So if I could open it up to the audience, let me know who you are and where you're from. So who'd like to ask the first question? We can skip the first question and go straight to the second question if you like. Who'd like to ask the second question? Does nobody want to quiz our Deputy Mayor? Yeah. Get somebody over there. Yeah. No, that's okay. Yeah. You, sir? Yes?
Oh, thank you. David Stradham, editor of...
Yeah, take the mic.
Thank you. David Stradham, editor of Premises and Facilities Management magazine. Just wanted to know, you mentioned kids in the future would have different jobs to what we have now.
Yeah.
That we're not seeing. What sort of jobs do you envisage those would be?
Well, I'm like Donald Rumsfeld, right? I don't know what I don't know. I don't. And we can guess. We can have a stab. I mean, I know currently where all the big vacancies are at the moment. So we are, and you see that largely by where the volume immigration is coming into London. So we're seeing immigration in three broad areas. One is in tech and digital, where we have a programming problem. We don't have enough kids who understand, can speak computer code. It should be a modern language, but we've been a bit slow, whereas in Eastern Europe in particular and in India, we're getting a lot of those people coming in. Interestingly, hospitality, because we're now nearly 17 million visitors a year, and that looks like we're getting nearly double-digit growth every year on tourists and visitors. Enormous opportunities there. So I think we have something like 42,000 hotel rooms in planning or in construction at the moment. An enormous number, and that's a predictor of what's coming. And then construction, massive immigration coming to help with the wave of, I mean, we're ripping parts of the city down and rebuilding them at the moment, but opening up new areas. I mean, the Olympic Park just north of here, 5 new neighborhoods, enormous facilities going in, new cultural buildings. Construction is going to be huge. But the truth is, in the future, I just don't know. I mean, I would like to think, if we've predicted it right, that we're going to need an awful lot of scientific researchers. We can get the life sciences side of our startup scene buzzing and frothing in the way the tech side is, and certainly we can get the venture capital to come here and invest in them, then we're going to be attracting lots of people who are, lab technicians, can experiment, all that kind of stuff, that knowledge end of the scale. But the point I guess I'm saying is we don't know. But all we can do is make sure that the framework, if you like, we're like, I guess we're like kind of groundsmen. Our job is to make sure that the pitch is level, the grass is mown, the lines are marked out, the uprights are there, the stadium is lit, so that when people want to come and play, they can. And that's what we're trying to get to. Interestingly, we've just published a 2050 infrastructure plan, right, looking at what we're going to need so we can achieve some kind of consensus about investment in London. And we're chatting this through, and I said, do you realize that we're predicting this infrastructure plan on current technology? So, for instance, on connectivity, the Infrastructure Plan 2050 says, well, we need fiber everywhere. And I said, well, by 2050, we might not need stuff in the ground. It might be all wireless. I mean, the history of communications has been removal of the wires, first between the handset and the thing, then between the thing and the wall, then between the wall and the thing from BT coming into the house. Pretty soon, the thing from BT coming into the house, the green box at the end of the road will go. And then, does the green box need to be connected? So, why are we predicting in 2050 we'll still need fiber? We just don't know. The government is dumb to this stuff. And so we need to just be open to the possibilities of what may come.
Question here.
Oh, I'm Charlie Leadbeater, and I'm talking after you, actually. I'm just wondering, great presentation, but I'm just wondering whether London will be successful in the future without being more at odds with the rest of the UK. Different on immigration, and needing greater devolution of its own powers to address its future?
There is a possibility of that. I mean, we're going through a period of pardon me, regional unpleasantness. There seems to be an antidote. I mean, I was born and brought up in Liverpool, right? And went to university in Newcastle, and there's always been, my entire life, a north-south antipathy. There aren't many countries where it doesn't happen, right? So Italy, the same, France, there's always this, particularly where you get smaller countries that have a large and dominant capital city, there's always a bit of antipathy towards the Big Smoke, the Great Wen. You know, right, if you look right back to Dickens, there have been sort of pejorative names for the capital. So there is a danger there, I guess. I mean, I think there are two things that need to happen that can help us with that. The first is that the great northern cities, the cities of my birth and education, need to be given the same kind of advantages, if you like, or certainly the same political leadership as London. I think we need to impose mayor, I mean, Liverpool has one already, but we need to impose mayors on Manchester, on Birmingham, on Newcastle, on Leeds, Sheffield, all these great cities. Because the one thing we're learning from London is that having a potent political figure who is a global but also national champion for your city makes a massive difference. They become the embodiment of the hopes and aspirations of that city, and they're able to go in and negotiate with government on that basis. The second is that those cities need to be given the freedom to decide things for themselves. I mean, we still don't have all that freedom. We have to negotiate all our transport investments with the Department for Transport. So we get a Secretary of State who's, you know, I don't know, I mean, the current one is a Member of Parliament for Derbyshire, who's negotiating about what should and shouldn't happen in London. We would like the freedom to raise our own money, have our own balance sheet, make our own decisions, much like they do in the US. And then I think the cities will start to work together much more. I mean, we find that there's an organisation called the Core Cities, which is 5 of us and some of the northern ones, and we work very closely together. We have very common interests, and the antipathy is waning between them. The other thing I think is that we need to be much more promotional about the advantages of London to the rest of the country. So financial services is anchored here, but actually there are more people employed in global financial services outside of London than there are in. So I think it's Deutsche Bank are the biggest private sector employer in Birmingham. JP Morgan have their back office, 2,500 people, in Bournemouth. You know, the fact that these global institutions are anchored here has huge payoff elsewhere, and I think if we can advertise that a lot more. There's one thing, sorry to go on this slightly complicated question, but there's one third thing that drives me crazy, and that is that the current structure in the UK is that the regions are encouraged to compete rather than to work together. And we see that, for instance, in tourism. Visit London, visit Britain, visit England, visit Wales, we're all given separate budgets, and we are told to effectively compete for the same American. Come to London. Don't go to Scotland. Come to London. Instead of saying, you know, let's work together. And what we've said is, why don't you have a fund? Give us all our budgets on the basis we have to work together, because our country isn't very big. Americans think it's the same size as theirs, whereas in fact it's not. And we've been doing we managed to persuade the Welsh to do a pilot with us, saying, come to London and go to Wales. Do city and castle. See the amazing countryside. It's only a couple of hours away, very fast train, we'll sort it all out for you. We ran a big competition in Wales, in the States, overwhelming response, overwhelming. So much the Welsh are delighted that we're sending tourists and they're sending tourists and we're exchanging, we're sharing the love between us. And so I think that regional competition at a governmental level is so debilitating that if we can find a structure that avoids it, so much the better. The EU, of course, they manage it much better. Their regional money is doled out on the basis that you have to have a partner. So whenever we get EU regional money to spend, we do it with Copenhagen or Amsterdam or you know, Paris or Berlin. And as a result, we have much better bilateral relations with European cities than we do with UK ones. It's insane. Sorry if that's a slightly long cocktail of...
Kit, thank you very much indeed.
No problem.
Deputy Mayor of London, thank you. I think Kit Malthouse has set us up very beautifully for the day. I think we could talk about the future of London all day long.